If the U.S. government was making that much money in 1880 alone, do you think they're ever going to demonize sugar? Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday afternoon. It's almost 1 o'clock. Today is a short day for me out working. I went to my mother and father-in-law's this morning, and today was bath day for my father-in-law, so I ended up being over there a little bit longer than I had anticipated. And I have to cut my day short because Mike's DoorDash car, that's what we call it, it's like the old beater car that he uses to DoorDash, is in the shop, and we need to pick that up tonight. Before we read I haven't even read my chapter yet. I have to go to the grocery store, and then we have to do dinner and our book club. So today is going to be just very short. Now, yesterday I worked a long day, and it rained, and it was cold, and it was miserable out. Today I don't have to be out that long, and look guys, it is 62 degrees. It is gorgeous. I have the sunroof open. I mean, it's ridiculous out here. Why couldn't today be my long day? No, I have to be out yesterday when it's nasty out. Also, on Tuesday night, I ended up being up till almost 3 a.m. editing our video. I'm having some computer issues, and it took a lot longer than I had anticipated. So yesterday, not only was it cold, rainy, and windy and yucky out, I was so tired. I mean, I'm just like driving, and I told Mike, I go, I'm so tired. My eyes were like burning. So when I got home last night, I took a shower, I got into my pajamas, and I was in bed and asleep by 9 p.m., which is crazy early for me. And I didn't get out of bed until 9:30 today, so I was in bed for 12 hours. I did not sleep that whole time, and a couple of times I got up to use the restroom and whatnot, but for the most part, I was catching up on my sleep, and it felt good. I feel so much better today. Mike asked me this morning, he's like, are you feeling better today? I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Yesterday I could barely get out of bed. I was just so sleepy, and today, not an issue at all. I did break my fast already, and Mike and I need to go to the grocery store. We are really low. I didn't have any hard-boiled eggs made. We're just getting low on food, so we need to make some time to do that. I don't know when we're gonna do it, but I ended up just bringing my fat coffee, and I had 2 of the Teton sausages with some sour cream. Sour cream is not easy to eat on the go in the car, but I made it work. So that's all that I had today. So that's everything for this quick update, and Mike and I will see you guys at dinner tonight. Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday night, and it is time for another edition of Dinner with Dawn.
Oh, and Mike. Sorry. The dinner looks so good, I can't get my mind off of it.
Tonight for dinner, we are having ribeye steaks and some shrimp, so a surf and turf.
And after a day like today, this is going to be phenomenal.
Why? What happened today?
It's just been a busy day.
Oh.
So I need something to make it all worthwhile.
So before we jump into the book, I already recorded a little bit earlier, which I told you guys, I think it was like 62 degrees or something when I recorded. It ended up getting up to 68 degrees today. Almost 70 degrees in February.
And tomorrow, Friday, I believe Friday evening, it's supposed to get down as low as 18 to 20.
During the day tomorrow, it's like a high of 36. So you're talking like a 40-degree swing.
Yep.
So what'd you do for lunch today? Because I kind of already told them what I did. Which also, I have hard-boiled eggs ready to go in the Instapot so that I have some for tomorrow since I didn't have any today.
I had a very small lunch today because we didn't have any leftovers. Because I ate the leftover chicken egg life noodle soup for dinner last night, which, by the way, we didn't have any more chicken broth, so I added a little bit of beef broth to it.
We had like beef bone broth in there, I think.
Didn't matter. It was phenomenal, and it was more like a soup as opposed to being more like a stew. And
I like it more like a stew because to me it's more filling that way.
And it was fantastic. So I ate that for dinner last night. There were no leftovers because that was leftovers. So today consisted of pork rinds.
That's all you had?
Pork rinds and I don't even think I took a cheese because I think I forgot we had the cheese.
What about a beef stick or something?
Yeah, I had a beef stick in there, but I'm just saying it was very light.
Yeah.
Now I was busy again, so
But still.
And I drank water. I know, and it's not optimal. It's not what I want to do, but every once in a while I can get away with it because I eat enough at dinner, and I just kind of incorporate it, almost like incorporate it into my fasting. So not what I want to do, but
you're
again,
close to doing an OMAD with those calories.
Right.
So we're eating a little bit outside of our eating window again tonight. It's almost 8 o'clock. We just have so much to do after we get off work. I had some errands to run today. Mike had to help with his mom and dad and then go somewhere with our daughter. So by the time we do all that after work and then actually cook a meal, it's almost impossible to eat by 7 p.m.
Especially a meal like this, steak and shrimp. I mean, it just takes a while. And today was unusual. I mean, we had some extra things that we don't normally have, but you have to make it work. We just, we figure a way to
fit everything
in and organize it, and then we make it happen.
We usually talk earlier in the day and kind of come up with a plan of how our late afternoon, evening is going to go, and then we just do the best we can.
We didn't do a lot of talking today between work and just everything else. It's just been a busy day and just not a lot of time for idle chit chat.
Yeah, and I think I said earlier I only worked for a few hours today.
I didn't have that luxury.
No, you had a full day of work. And then as soon as we're done recording this, Mike has to help our son. He comes over here to pay bills because they don't have a computer and they pay most of the bills online. So he's coming over tonight so that Mike can help him get all that done. So tonight's chapter was a little interesting because basically it was the history of how sugar worked its way into being a household name. Because when sugar first came out, it could only be grown in tropical areas and it had no shelf life at all. Like if it did not get consumed right away, it would ferment and rot. So for us to have it, or anybody to have it, it was considered a huge luxury, and it was really only for the wealthy.
Yeah, it didn't grow in the United States. Once they discovered ways of getting it to various parts of the world and introducing it to other people groups, that's when it really took hold. And then
they refined it. They learned how to refine it, and then they were able to transport it. Once they were able to transport it, they started taxing it, and then they realized we're going to make a lot of money on this. Taxing it was a game changer.
Gee, isn't it always a game changer? Tax the items that are addictive because people will never stop using them.
And they say that there's two main things that really changed and allowed sugar to become a household name and for everybody and not just the rich. One of those was beet sugar because they were able to grow that like here in the United States. The other one, we don't know because that's going to be in tomorrow's chapter. It was two main things.
Well, I took a sneak peek. I know what it is, but we're not going to tell you. So interesting, for the start of chapter 2, I noticed when I read the first half of the chapter, of course, it didn't grab my attention because it didn't have all the stats. The statistics are what really just make you go nuts.
It fascinates you.
So they didn't have that, but there was the history there explaining, as Dawn mentioned, where you could find natural sugarcane and then how it slowly made its way around the globe into different areas, different climates. The first sentence in the chapter I thought was kind of interesting because I didn't really highlight a whole lot in this chapter. I know you did highlight some things. But the first sentence says, sugar is fuel for plants and can be found in all of them. That's interesting. Never really thought about that, but apparently there are trace amounts of natural sugar in just about every plant.
The main form of sweetener prior to the discovery of sugar was honey and maple syrup. They couldn't use those in anything cold. It didn't mix well with coffee. And neither one can be produced in the mass quantities that sugarcane can be produced in. Once the sugarcane was discovered, it was a losing battle as far as like honey and maple syrup. They couldn't compete.
At that time, right? At that time in history, right, you couldn't mass produce anything really.
Right.
And so, honey and maple syrup came naturally, so you could only get as much as was available naturally. And so, like you said, once they discovered sugar cane and then beet sugar,
sugar became basically limitless.
Well, yeah, beet sugar was a game changer.
So it says here, when cultivated with modern technology, sugar cane can produce more calories per acre to feed a population than any other animal or plant. It can survive years of storage, it travels well, and it can be consumed on arrival unheated and uncooked, which it was a far cry from when it was just them them cutting down the sugarcane stalks, it had to be consumed immediately, like we said, or would ferment or rot. So cultivating it and processing it and refining it made all the difference in the world. They also talk about the fact that sugar is not just used to sweeten foods. There are a lot of uses. It tells you in here, it's used as a preservation of fruits and berries. It inhibits the growth of microorganisms that would otherwise cause spoiling. It's inexpensive, and it has made possible the revolution in jams and jellies that began in the mid-19th century. It inhibits mold and bacteria in condensed milk and other liquids. It reduces the harshness of the salt that's used for curing and preserving meat. It's an ideal fuel for yeast. I mean, and the reason it was such a hot commodity.
Right. It wasn't just because it was a sweetener. It wasn't
Right.
just because people were going nuts over the way it tasted or how it affected their taste buds. But it was like an all-in-one food ingredient, and it had so many, like you said, so many uses. It made sense that it was something good and it was something special. It's just like anything that we use, especially in overabundance. We discover later down the line that you can't have too much of a good thing.
And it not only gives food a sweetness, but it also helps with the texture. So that's huge as well. So it says that Egyptians were the first who developed the refining techniques, but as sugar diffused through Europe and they received it, they used it primarily for medicinal reasons.
Yep.
But as the price of it slowly went down, it started to get used more as a sweetener in foods, and it moved out of the apothecary shops, which is where it was mostly used, and then was then used in foods more.
Mom and Pop's candy store. You know, it's funny, the Egyptians, you think the Egyptians, they built some of the coolest structures, right? And they're the first ones to kind of refine sugar. I mean,
they're smart.
Man, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. That's how they got those pyramids built so fast, by the way. They just dangled that proverbial sugar cube in front of the workers and said, look, you want this? Get that thing built.
Well, it's funny you say that. As far as barriers, as far as getting the sugar out to the masses, one of the main things was cultivating the sugar. And it's such horrible work to cultivate the sugar that the only way they could do it was with slaves. So it talks in this chapter a lot about how they use slaves to produce the mass quantities of sugar. They use an example here too. The number of slaves on Barbados, the richest of the sugar islands until Jamaica later eclipsed it, went from a handful early in the 17th century to more than 46,000 in 1683. By the 1830s, when the British emancipationists finally put an end to the slave trade, some 12.5 million Africans had been shipped off as slaves to the New World. 2/3 of them worked and died growing and refining sugar. It was the only way they could get it done because nobody else would do it.
Right.
Even the poor of the poor, they said, wouldn't do it because it was such backbreaking work. So between the 17th century and the 19th century, sugar became the equivalent to oil. What we consider oil. It's
modern day oil.
Right. They called it king sugar or white gold. And it constituted almost a fifth of all of British imports, 5 times the amount of tobacco.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy the thought how quickly sugar became such a hot commodity.
Well, and then that's when they really started taxing it. The tax revenues were astronomical. England in 1874, when the government finally abolished import duties, which means they stopped taxing it, Parliament said that sugar is the delight of childhood and the solace of old age. It's exceedingly nutritious and wholesome. So by this logic, the poor should have every right to consume it as much as the rich. And so they stopped taxing it. And the U.S. Congress was debating doing the same thing, and they never did. They made more than $500 million just in the 1880s alone. So I can't even imagine what that number is now.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
In the 1790s, Americans were successfully able to grow sugarcane, but only in Louisiana, because again, it's a tropical, it only grows in a tropical climate. And again, they just start talking about the 2 main factors that transformed sugar from being a luxury for the wealthy to being a pleasure for all, is what they say. And that is one, the fact that they discovered beet sugar, and that could be grown outside of the tropics. And then it just will tell us basically the other thing that helped make sugar a household name in tomorrow's chapter. I did not read ahead, so I don't know what it says.
Well, I didn't read the chapter, the whole second half of the chapter, but I did read the first couple sentences because I wanted to determine if this chapter would be better served as one whole chapter or if we broke it into two halves. Sometimes the chapter flows so well that you want to just continue it on and finish it in its entirety. But because of the way they broke it up, it made sense to stop halfway through. And you know, it's just like anything interesting that you learn. There's always that part of it. There's a lot of times it could be a historical aspect that you just look at it and say, that's not very exciting, you know, because the numbers jumped out at us in that first chapter and we got really excited and our eyes were widened. But knowing the history and understanding that back in a time when getting things moved from point A to point B was really difficult, it was very challenging, they did pretty well because this was obviously a hot commodity that everybody wanted a piece of. Clearly, it was an economic windfall, and so they found a way to get it everywhere they could.
If the U.S. government was making that much money in 1880 alone, what was the number?
$500 million, I think.
$500 million in 1880. I mean, think about that. That's a lot of money now, let alone back then.
Right.
Do you think they're ever going to demonize sugar and make us not want to consume it? You know how much money they're making? I can't imagine those numbers now. If that was in 1880, it was $500 million.
Well, and at this point, too, it's in everything.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter now. But you're right. By demonizing it and by coming out and saying, hey,
sugar's bad for you.
It's bad for you. You need to stop eating it. It's killing you.
They're never going to do that.
Yeah, that's cutting off a money source for them. But I also think the government is aware, as is most of us, that it's an addictive substance. So because of that, they actually probably can come out and say, hey, this is not good for you. We really don't recommend that you eat lots of it because they know you are anyway.
Because we're all addicted.
Because they know Twinkies taste that good. They know that sweetness is good and that we cannot resist it. You said in the last video that we'll never not eat sugar long enough to even know if there's any...
if you're going to have withdrawal from
withdrawal symptoms. I mean, that just tells you. The government knows that too. The food industry knows that too.
Someone left a comment on the last video about the government regulating it. They're never going to regulate it. That's money out of their pockets that they are not going to give up on. I commented back and said that I don't know that I necessarily agree with that anyway. I never agree with the government getting involved in our decisions.
Yeah.
I prefer us to be able to make our own decisions, but just the fact that if they did regulate it, they'd be losing billions of dollars. It's never going to happen.
I read that comment as well, and I was thinking about that. There are just some things that if the government regulates and they put too many restrictions on, it does ultimately affect the bottom line, but it also affects the supply and demand. By regulating something and saying you can't have it, then you create like an underground trade for that.
More demand almost.
And then more demand because, again, right, people, now you're telling them they can't have it and now you want it more. That natural, I didn't want it until it was taken away from me or until it was unavailable and now I want it. So I don't know necessarily that it would be a bad thing because they could artificially create demand by regulating the production and the refinement and the distribution and the consumption and then ultimately rescind that and just watch it explode. Because people would be going nuts, like, oh, we can get it again. I mean, kind of like with prohibition and alcohol. Notice they've never done that again, because again, it's a cash cow. They're never going to take that money away. So
that's it for the first half of this chapter. Again, it wasn't super like
jaw-dropping and exciting.
Yeah, because it was literally just the history of how sugar got here and how it exploded in being available and wanted and needed.
So there's another interesting little tidbit of information here I found. Sorghum, which is an old world grass, it was used for feeding cattle. It also had a natural sweetness to it. And for a minute, they thought that was going to compete with sugar and that they might be able to create this competitive market. And towards the end of the 19th century, they thought it might be a viable substitute or replacement possibly. But what do you think did that in? It was as a plant. And what happens when you have plants? If you don't have water, you don't have
maybe did the crop
the right conditions.
I'm trying to remember,
yeah, because of droughts and insects. Because remember, when you start transporting all these different plants around the world, you're bringing bugs with them. And those bugs might not be native to the land where it ends up. And then next thing you know, you got acres and acres of crops that are no longer good because they've been devoured by insects. So that only lasted for a minute and it was over. And then eventually cane sugar, then beet sugar, and now, what is the hot commodity now?
High
fructose corn syrup. Cheap to make, mass quantities, goes into everything, easy to transport, and the unhealthiest thing you could probably put in your body of all the sweeteners. But it's there.
They tried to make it out like it was a replacement for sugar and that it was better than sugar. But
right. But it's not going anywhere, and it's not better by any stretch.
So that's it for tonight, guys.
We tried to make it interesting, but sometimes you just can't. You just have to read it for what it is, share it with everyone, and then move on to the next thing. And like I said, sometimes history and historical stuff is not all that exciting, but in the big picture, we have to know. We have to know how it got here because it's not native to America. It wasn't native to most places. And I mean, you mentioned Jamaica, and what was the other location? Another location that were like the two top sugar producing areas, and those are just little tiny islands when you consider the entire globe. So it is still an interesting story. It's just leading up to the more important and the more health related and the more fascinating stuff that's sure to come down the line. So
yep, that's it for tonight. We will see you guys. I will see you guys next Tuesday for my last Love Keto, Love Yourself for the month of February.
Right. February is over.
My last weigh-in for the month. And then on Wednesday next week, we will be jumping into our new challenge for March, which is, do you remember?
It has something to do with exercise. Movement March.
Yeah.
Or Mike and I are in March, or
Mike and I are each going to try to walk an additional 50 miles in the month of March.
So I'm going to go from 0 miles to 50.
Well, what I'm saying is that we get some steps in every day. My Apple Watch tracks how far I walk every day, just doing my regular everyday things and delivering. I'm not including that in the numbers is what I'm saying. We want it to be its own separate, intentional going out and walking. Our goal is to each walk an additional 50 miles in the month of March. Again, we're not sure how the weather's going to cooperate, especially after a day like today where it was 68 degrees. We have no idea what's going to happen. That's our goal. And I've already had a lot of you guys reach out and say that you are you're doing your own thing, you're setting your own movement goals. And that's awesome.
And that's awesome. That's what you need to do because, again, everybody has, different ways of reaching the same goal. That reminds me of one of the subscribers that mentioned doing the walking, but not nearly as much as we're going to do. And then she revealed
she's 77.
that she's 77 years old.
Yeah.
You know what? Just get out and move. Just get out and walk. You don't have to walk a certain distance.
We just want everyone to do, if you can, do more than what you're doing now.
Yep. Especially because
push yourself a little bit.
Yeah, because it's winter. Everybody's been locked up in the house. Now, it's been a mild winter by most cases, so, I mean, you probably could get out and do a little bit more. We could have, too, if we wanted to. By and large, it's winter, and you're stuck in the house. So now, as spring starts to roll in, this is the time to get out and start stretching them legs and getting those arms out there.
And I appreciate everyone who suggested different apps that we could use that will actually track like how far we've gone. So I'm going to download one of those, and that will keep track of the distance that we walk each day. Our plan is to have dinner and then go for a walk after dinner during the week. As you guys can see, it's been hard for us just to get dinner at a
decent time.
Yeah, at a decent time. So then trying to get dinner in, record, and get a walk in.
We'll be walking at midnight.
We're pushing it. But that's our goals. And so far for the year 2023, we have been very successful at the goals that we have set, and I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, the structure that we have in place right now is so much better than it was a year ago. So I'm glad for that as well.
Yeah, so we just need to keep that momentum going, and having these small challenges and different goals for each month has just really kept us structured. So that's why I decided to go ahead and implement the one for March. So that starts in 6 days. Again, there will be one more video out before that. Actually, 2 more videos. My regular video, and then we'll record Dinner with Dawn next Tuesday. So we'll technically have 2 more videos out. But we start next Wednesday walking.
Today's the 23rd. Tomorrow's the 24th. Monday's the 28th. That's the last day of February. So
Tuesday then.
So Tuesday will be the start of Movement March.
I don't know where I got Wednesday from. Look at your phone again and just double check that.
Oh, I know, because I know what the last day is.
Yeah, for work you have to know what the last day is.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. It is Tuesday the 28th.
Okay. Thank you.
Holy cow. I was wrong.
I was right.
Oops.
I love when I'm right.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't happen often.
Hilarious.
Only time you were really right was when you decided to marry me.
Oh, jeez.
My sweetie, my sugar plum, my...
We'll see you guys next week.
Yep, have a good night.